What is the LC and how does it work? 21 type of letters of credit. 5 banking broker which cover the LC process. Swift message option definition. What is the UCP and compared to other same rules? And all useful data that you need to learn letters of credit. Let's get started. Hello guys, I'm so happy to welcome you with another lesson. As a short introduction to new members, this is Ali, Master in Business Law, and I'm here to share with you international business lesson. Okay, today we are going to talk about letters of credit. As a definition, letters of credit is contractual commitment by the foreign buyer's bank to pay once the exporter ships the goods and cargo and present the required documentation to the exporter's bank as proof. But how LC process gets started? In business, we call the buyer consignee, importer, or supplier. But in the LC process, we should say applicant, not buyer. Okay? Don't try to memorize it. We will repeat and learn. Okay? Come back to a slide. Seller says that your bank should guarantee the payment, otherwise we don't do anything. There is no deal. From now, we name the buyer under applicant. Therefore, the applicant meets his bank and asks them to guarantee his payment against the conditions that he prescribed. Guarantee name is LC. Guarantee name is letters of credit. Applicant should complete his request on a paper, and this job is called opening the LC. The bank that gives applicant these services is called issuing bank. Issuing bank undertakes to the seller to pay deal amount. Here we have a new word to learn. During this process, seller or exporter is called beneficiary, right? The beneficiary will be paid by issuing bank if he provides documents and meets LC terms. Now we can define a letter of credit. About terms of LC. Who set first the terms and condition in the letter of credit? Buyer and seller, right? Buyer and seller set first the terms and condition in the LC, or applicant and beneficiary. Or better say, LC is independent of other contracts, which means the beneficiary gets paid as he completes the necessary document and LC terms. LC is independent of other contracts, which means the beneficiary gets paid as he completes the necessary document and LC terms. So, completing presentation is LC terms and conditions, UCP, International Standard Banking Practice. Here we have 3 levels for the bank to completing the letters of credit by the beneficiary. UCP means International Banking Rules for letters of credit. As you see, we have at least 3 contracts. The main contract between seller and buyer, applicant contract for opening LC, LC contract between bank and beneficiary. This chart is not perfect. As you know, this is an international process. So let me ask how issuing bank informed the beneficiary from LC. Sometimes issuing bank has a broker in beneficiary land, but most of the time issuing bank needs the seller or beneficiary bank address to contract them and complete the LC process. So there will be a second bank, advising bank. Now let's review the process. We applied for LC and the banking system confirmed. Now the seller should dispatch the goods. After loading, the shipping company gives the bill of lading to the seller. Seller, or better say beneficiary, goes to his bank by documents handed. His bank, that we name it advising bank, exactly acts as a nominated bank. It means paying a deal amount to the beneficiary and receive the documents. Of course, here we have a technical point. Nominated bank and advising bank could be different. But for now, both of them are one. Advising bank forwards all documents to issuing bank and gets reimbursed. Now, issuing bank informs the applicant that the bill of lading and other documents are received. Buyer or applicant to reach the documents should pay the LC amount to the issuing bank. Without documents and bill of lading, he is not the owner of freight and he can't deliver a product because the shipping broker will ask bill of lading, right? It was a simple and basic letters of credit process. Sometimes it could be complicated relation. Let me explain on the screen. If you remember, when I talk about advising bank, I mentioned that advising bank could be nominated bank, right? It means here we could have two banks, one as a nominated bank and the second as a advising bank. But what is different? Advising bank, or AB, is responsible for advising and announcing to the beneficiary that LC was opened by issuing bank and is available. Nominated bank, or NB, the bank in which the credit is available, means the bank that paid the deal amount against documents, and beneficiary should leave documents to them. Should leave documents to nominated bank, right? Don't forget that due to the situation, we could have a few bank broker in our LC operation. In the previous example, we had a bank who is provide advising and nomination banking services, as well as sometimes issuing bank and advising bank are the same. Maybe you need to ask a third bank to confirm your LC process. In this story, confirming bank, or CB, comes to confirm your LC documents. About confirming, this service only check your LC documents, and as an example, if your bank is bankrupt, there will be no responsibility for the confirming bank services. So that is why in a large deal we meet another bank who is covered payment risk in LC. Reimbursing bank, or RB. This bank accepts to pay the deal amount, the LC amount, instead of issuing bank. As you see, a letter of credit could be a complex process. Up to now, we learned the LC process. It was a basic payment process between importer and exporter and banking system. As you know, LC has a wide range of usage and it is not limited to import and export business. So it's time to talk about the types of LC. If you remember, in our example, beneficiary meets the nominated bank with his documents, and due to the main contract with the buyer, the nominated bank does checking the documents and pay the agreed amount of funds provided the provision of the letters of credit are met. This type of LC is site credit, payment against document, right? About types of LC, the base and process are same, and what makes the difference is our usage. So I don't throw a separate chart for each process. All of them are same in process. Anyway, I will prepare a short video for each one, and you can review all terms by following my YouTube channel. Okay, let's continue. We learned that the basic type is site payment. The next question is about canceling an edit. Therefore, site LC could be edit, could be cancel. The second type of LC, or you can say branch of site LC, irrevocable site LC. In this type, there is not any nominated bank. It means issuing bank should pay the deal amount. It cannot be cancelled or amended without the consent of all parties concerned. It means to cancel, to edit, you need all parties' agreements. On the other hand, we have revolving LC. It means one letters of credit process, one process that could continue for a long time. Next one, revocable LC. A revocable LC can be cancelled or amended by the issuing bank at any time and without prior notice to consent of the beneficiary. It's exactly the opposite of irrevocable, and it's not safe for beneficiaries. So we learned the site meaning irrevocable and revocable and revolving. The next one is usance LC. In this type, issuing bank, importer's bank, guaranteed to make the payment by the present date. It means this credit is type of LC wherein the buyer is allowed to make the payment after delivery and within a stipulated grace period. Unlike with site LC, the buyer doesn't have to make payment immediately to receive the document. A negotiation credit or LC by negotiation. Sometimes seller or beneficiary needs his money and can't stay for the issuing bank settlement. At this time, he asks another bank to accept his LC document. And the next type is deferred LC. That is same usance LC. Usance and deferred letters of credit don't have any significant difference. Both are the methods of paying at some future date. However, there is a little difference. What is the difference between deferred payment and usance? Usance is more similar to an acceptance letters of credit, since usance letters of credit involves a draft. A deferred payment letters of credit, also known as usance letters of credit, is a commercial letters of credit that provide that the beneficiary will be paid, and not at the time the beneficiary makes a complying presentation, but at a later specified and maturity date. This is different. About the interest rate and commission and discount. In the future days, I will make a video for payment accounting and talk about calculation and computation of contract math. If you remember, we talked about sight LC, deferred LC, usance or acceptance, and negotiation LC. But about the last column, negotiation LC freely. This is exactly negotiation LC, and the only difference is here you can negotiate with any bank, and it's not limited to nominated bank, right? Let's continue. Transferable LC. This type of LC allows the first beneficiary to transfer some or all of the credit to another party. This is usually done where the first beneficiary is not actual manufacturer of the goods and is sourcing it from other. In an LC agreement, a seller, first beneficiary, has a sale to execute with the buyer but is unable to complete the merchandise order from the manufacturer. By transferring a portion of transferable letters, transferable LC, to the manufacturer, a third party or supplier, the seller provides them an assurance of payment by leveraging the buyer bank credit and utilize this LC to purchase those goods, those products on time. So this is a type of leverage in business. Once named as a second beneficiary, it possesses all the same rights as the original does. The original beneficiary then can request the bank to transfer a part or all the credit to the second beneficiary. Back-to-back LC. This type is like transferable LC, but what is different? The difference is that in back-to-back, the first LC serves as a collateral for the second. In fact, the back-to-back LC involves two letters of credit to secure financing for a single transaction. Back-to-back LC are actually made up of two distinct LOC. One issued by the buyer's bank to the intermediary and the other issued by the intermediary bank to the seller. With the original LC from the buyer's bank in place, the broker goes to his own bank and has a second LC issue with the seller as the beneficiary. The seller is thus insured of payment upon fulfilling the terms of the contract and presenting the appropriate documentation to the intermediary bank. In some cases, the seller may not even know who the ultimate buyer of the goods. Red Clause LC. Sometimes, and after opening a type of LC, the seller, or better said, beneficiary, says that I'm short of working capital. In this situation, the importer, or better say, applicant, can pay a percentage of LC to the exporter, even before the loading and shipping process, and as a financial support. This amount will be mentioned in red color, and that is why we name it Red Clause. So, in this clause, beneficiary will be paid with percentage as an advance payment. During this process, the nominated bank could ask for a type of undertaking from the beneficiary, and this job name is the documentary red clause. On the other hand, if the nominated bank only asks for a simple receipt, this is killing red clause, right? So we learned two types of red clause, killing and documentary red clause LC, right? Green clause letters of credit. Experts often consider green clause LCs to be an extension of red clause. While a red clause allows for an advance to cover the cost of purchasing raw materials, processing, and packing of goods, a green clause LC advances a step further by also taking pre-shipment warehousing at the port of origin and insurance into account. These unique letters also require a greater amount of documentation. In addition, the bank that is issuing the letter requires title documents, which serve as proof of warehousing status in order to advance any payments. In general, traders use green clause LC in transactions from commodity markets such as rice, gold, or grain. Much like red clause LCs, the name for green clause comes from the fact that traditionally practitioners printed this special clause in green ink. Inland LC. Inland LC used in domestic trade transaction where both the buyer and seller are from the same country. It's used for transaction in the home country, right? What we learned was the main types of letters of credit, but maybe you are faced with another type, for example, a standby LC. Pay attention, due to your business, LC and other financial services could support your demands, and it's not possible to define a new word and a new type for each one, because in this situation we have a wide range of LC. On the other hand, you can also define a new type. For example, we had the LC under the name transferable, so shall I define a new one as a non-transferable LC? So other types are new usage of LC, not a new type. Anyway, I'd like to have a review on other names that maybe you find it in Google or meet and faced in your commercial negotiation. As I said, some words, in fact, are not a type, but better to talk about them. This is very important to consider this point. When your business partner talks about LC conditions, you should explain and specify in detail. What is acceptance LC? Seller gives a time draft, or better say a time bill of exchange, to the nominated bank. The bank accepts bill of exchange drawn on the bank by the debtor, discounts them, and agree to pay for them when they mature. It's the same of usance and a negotiation LC. So it was acceptance LC. Commercial letter of credit, or CLC. Your company may request a CLC from your bank when one of your suppliers is uncertain about your ability to pay, and bank issue document that ensures a supplier to a company gets paid for the goods and services it provides. A standby LC. A standby LC assures the payment if the buyer doesn't pay. After fulfilling all the terms under SPLC, Standby LC, if the seller proves that the promised payment was not made, in this situation, the bank will pay the seller. In a nutshell, it doesn't facilitate a transaction, but guarantees payment. It's quite similar to a bank guarantee. Confirmed LC. The exporter can seek additional protection by getting a confirmed LC where the advising bank also ensures the payment. This is primarily to avoid the risk of non-payment from the first bank. It will add to the cost of doing business for the exporter. Discounting the letter of credit. This is exactly what we learned about negotiation LC. In this case, the advising bank can pay the amount on which they agree to the exporter after deducting a discounting fee before the actual payment by the importer. Direct pay LC. A letter of credit where the issuing bank directly pays the beneficiary and then asks the buyer to repay the amount. Sometimes people use direct pay LC instead of at sight. So it's wrong. Extension letters of credit means substitute letters of credit from the same bank which issued the existing LC, substantially identical to the existing LC except that it has a state termination date at least 1 year later than that of existing letters of credit. A non-operative LC is one that cannot be used by the beneficiary in the form in which it's issued. Some examples may make this clearer. The buyer says he doesn't know where he wants the goods shipped to just yet, right? So the LC is issued saying port of discharge to be advised by amendment. What is a transit LC? Ask a third country banking system to announce to advising bank in the seller country. I mean through a bank abroad to a third country bank. Such credits are called transit credits. The main reason for opening transit LC, the reputation and credit of the intermediary bank help the beneficiary to accept the opening credit. The credit opening bank is unknown to the receiving bank in the beneficiary country. So we need a third bank to do it for us. Direct communication between buyer and seller country is not possible. Mixed payment LC. Such LCs can have multiple payment terms as well as multiple payment methods. For example, 50% of the payment happen on site, another 25% payment occur after 30 days of shipment, and remaining 25% payment will happen on receipt of the shipment. In the next video, we are going to talk about UCP and SWIFT message. I will mention that field 42M is about mixed payment and LC. Third-party letters of credit. The applicant issues the LC for the beneficiary while the third party makes the actual transaction. Basically, transaction parties and the beneficiary can be different in such type of LC. In the previous video that was about the logistic process, we learned about 3PL or third-party logistics, and so third-party LC could be useful for this type of logistic process. There is another same method of payment that works like a LC and document could solve payment challenge exactly like LC process, and one of these methods is bill of exchange. Bill of exchange has its own definition and words, but sometimes those words used in the LC process. For instance, DP or document against payment, or DA, document against acceptance. So it will be better if you learn the bill of exchange process and the words to prevent misunderstanding your commercial negotiation. If you remember, we talked about UCP rules. We have also the same document for bill of exchange. Its name is URC. I decided to prepare a separate video for a bill of exchange and one for the UCP. If you would like, you can follow the next lesson. Only needs to find me on the YouTube platform. If you don't like to follow me, should take more time on other lesson and ensure that you know all necessary knowledge about payment. In this section, I'd like to have a short and fast review on the SWIFT message. As you know, the SWIFT system is a banking process and you don't need to learn technical points, but it will be better to know something about it. As I said, SWIFT message have a special format in which bank fulfill these forms to connect with each other. It means we have a separate framework for each type of banking message. MT700 is a special SWIFT message type that used by issuing bank when issuing letters of credit. An issuing bank sends the terms and conditions of documentary credit with MT700. So this message is sent by the issuing bank to the advising bank. This form specifies all letters of credit details and conditions to the destination bank or seller bank. Okay, in this form we have two types of data, optional and mandatory. As an example, the sequence of total. This field specifies the number of this message. If only MT700 is issued, it will say 1 of 1. It means we have one paper, we have one LC form, right? If in addition 1, MT701 or 701 or MT701, right, is sent for the same LC, is the same MT700, and in fact it's the second paper and continue of the first LC paper. I mean the first LC is MT700. Maybe we have two LC during a day. If you remember, some of the LC could have some change and issuing bank opens second one. Additional documentary credit information should be transmitted via one or more MT701 or 701 up to 3 MT701 may be sent in addition to the main message to the MT700. So the sequence of total is a mandatory field. So here we meet M, right? It's easy. This column, I mean the tag column, is the order field in the banking system. These codes used to coordinate data and have a fast access. A field 40 A, form of documentary credit. This field specifies the type of credit. As example, irrevocable, transferable, irrevocable standby, irrevocable transferable standby. So here you should specify the types of LC. Documentary credit number. This field specifies the documentary credit number which has been assigned by the sender. Who is the sender? Issuing bank, right? According to ICC opinions, absence of the letters of credit number on the document is not valid ground for refusal. Anyway, they must give a number. Reference to pre-advice. This is an optional field. I'd like to draw your attention to back-to-back LC. This field gives a reference to the pre-advised letters of credit. Only if a pre-advised LC has been previously sent to the beneficiary. In most cases, this field is not utilized. Date of issue. This field specifies the date on which the issuing bank sender considers the documentary credit as being issued. Applicable rules. This field means which rules support this contract. One of the following codes must be used. EUCP latest version, ISP 98 latest version. If you don't know what is the ISP 98, return to my YouTube channel. We talked about it and the difference with the UCP, Institute of International Banking Law and Practice, right? Anyway, in this part, we meet the legal support. These parts don't need definition because titles are easy understanding. Date and place of expiry, applicant bank details, applicant details, address, number, right? Beneficiary, currency code, amount. This field mentions the currency code and amount of the letters of credit. If you would like to know about currency codes, research for ISO 4217. The currency must be valid currency code. Field 39A, percentage credit amount tolerance. This is an optional field. It mentions allows tolerance of the LC amount and in the additional conditions are presented clause of penalty relevant to the quality specification of goods. For example, a tolerance not exceed 5% more or 5% less than the quantity of the goods is allowed. Field 39B, maximum credit amount. 39B further qualifies the documentary credit amount. Is the term used and no increase in LC amount is allowed by way of tolerance, but field a decrease tolerance is allowed. Field 39C, additional amount covered. This is an optional field in most cases. It's not utilized. It's to state the maximum amount covered by the letters of credit. Field 41A, available with by. This field identifies the bank with which the credit is available. As example, available with identifier code BIC by DEF payment, DEF payment. BIC means a bank identifier code, bank identification code, right? DEF means deferred payment. Field 42, draft at. This is an optional field. This field specifies the tenor of draft to be drawn under the document recorded. I mean other documents which back to this LC. As an example, bill of exchange. So in this section, the issuing bank mentioned the bill of exchange data. Field 42, drawee. To complete the previous topic, in this field, bank should mention the person who should pay by bill of exchange. In the next video, we are going to talk about the bill of exchange. You will learn about it. As an example, what means drawee and how it works. These parts specify more details about our payment methods. These parts are about shipping type. These parts don't need my definition, right? Titles are understable. As a person who is going to have a commercial negotiation with a foreign, it's enough to know how LC works and what is different between the types. So this video is enough. But if you would like to have a more detail, for example, how to apply for a letters of credit, it depends on the country that you live. You should ask your bank system about these services and about Swift Message. If you are a financial expert, you can download this electronic book, and here you have all Swift Message in details. In the next video, we will talk about the bill of exchange process, URC 522, and what is the difference between LC and bill of exchange, and have a short review on other payment methods. As a final point, don't forget that LC is the same process, but maybe you find a new usage for this process under a new name. For example, a special LC to build your house. So this is not word and all we talked about LC. It was international topics, and maybe you find the different name in your land, in your country. Well, if you are interested in following these types of topics, find me on the YouTube platform and smash on subscribe button. I'm waiting for your feedback. See you soon.